The last line. Captain Sarah Chen stood on the observation deck of the Vanguard, watching the refugee ships cluster behind her fleet like frightened children. 50,000 alien civilians. No weapons. No defenses. Just people running from something that ate stars. The Devourers had already consumed the Velkar homeworld. 3 billion lives erased in 72 hours. Hyperspace signatures detected, her tactical officer announced. His voice was steady, but his hands trembled. They're here. Sarah had served with the Velkar. She'd eaten with them, laughed with their pilots. Commander Tresh had shown her holographs of his family before they were consumed. She remembered his smile. All ships, this is Captain Chen, she transmitted. Defensive Formation Delta. Engineering, route all available power to the shields. The human fleet was small, 12 warships and a handful of support vessels. They'd been sent to the Outer Rim as a gesture of goodwill, humanity's way of saying, we belong here too. We're part of this galaxy now. But the older civilizations had other plans. When the evacuation alert came through 3 hours ago, every advanced species in the sector had one response: leave. The architects had full-jumped their battle fleets away. The Vadran Collective abandoned their own observation posts. The Carillion Council transmitted a single message: retreat immediately or we will not assist recovery efforts. They were saving themselves. And they were leaving the Velkar to die. Sarah had made her decision in seconds. Lieutenant Reeves, open a channel to all refugee vessels, she said quietly. Tell them to follow us. We're staying. Captain, the Council has ordered us to. I know what they ordered, Lieutenant. Do it. The first devourer emerged from the distortion, and Sarah's breath caught. It was vast, a living weapon of flesh and void, its body a nightmare of writhing tendrils and consuming moths. Behind it came 3 more, each one the size of a moon, their surfaces rippling with an hunger that made the sensors scream warnings. They had never been built. They had simply always consumed. All hands to battle stations, Sarah commanded. Let's show them what humanity fights for. The Vanguard launched its first salvo, missiles streaking across the void like angry stars. They struck the lead devourer and detonated in a bloom of light, and the creature barely slowed. Its tendrils lashed out, and 2 of the missiles were caught mid-flight, crushed to molten slag. It's assimilating our weapons, Weapons Officer Yuki gasped. It's learning. Then we adapt faster, Sarah said. Shift to penetration patterns. Go for the core mass. All ships, focus fire on Sector 7. What happened next would be remembered forever on Earth, whispered about in academies, painted on memorials. Humanity didn't run. They didn't negotiate or surrender or seek mercy from those more powerful than themselves. They fought. The Vanguard took a direct hit that buckled her starboard shields. 300 crew members died in the blast. Sarah felt the shudder through the floor, and she didn't flinch. Reroute those systems. Return fire, she ordered. Young Ensign Marcus Webb, barely 22, piloted the Courage into a firing run that should have killed him. His weapons lit up the darkness, buying seconds for the refugee ships to move. When the Devourer's tendril came for him, he didn't break formation. He held the line. The Courage was incinerated, but those 5 seconds meant everything. Dr. Amara Okonkwo was not a soldier. She ran the medical bay, and she'd never fired a weapon in her life. But when the auxiliary reactor took critical damage, she knew no one else could reach it in time. She went down into the burning corridors with nothing but a repair kit and her will, moving through smoke and failing gravity, and she fixed it. She died doing it, caught in the secondary explosion. But the shields held. Hour after hour, humanity bled into the black. The Devourers were powerful, ancient, unstoppable by any normal measure. But they had never faced something like this. A species that had nothing to lose but their lives, and they spent them like ammunition. Sarah watched her fleet die. She watched friends and strangers sacrifice everything. And she watched the refugee ship slip away, one by one, jumping to the safe coordinates she transmitted. 50,000 lives saved. When the Vanguard finally couldn't fight anymore, her hull breached and burning, Sarah ordered the evacuation. She was the last one to leave, standing on the bridge as the ship came apart around her, watching the devourers recede into the distance. They hadn't destroyed her fleet. But they had shown humanity something the galaxy had forgotten, that standing alone against the dark was still standing. The emergency pod carried Sarah into the void, towards a small transport vessel that waited in the darkness. As she watched the Vanguard explode in a funeral pyre of light, she transmitted one final message back to Earth. We held the line. They got away. And we'll do it again if we have to. In a small room on Earth, on a world that had never been invaded, Admiral Catherine Reeves received that message. She read it 3 times, her hands steady as stone. Then she began making calls. The world wakes. The news spread across Earth like wildfire. Captain Sarah Chen's message was simple, but its meaning was not. Humanity's fleet had been destroyed. Thousands dead. And they'd chosen to do it, chosen to stand against something ancient and terrible rather than save themselves. In Moscow, in Lagos, in Sao Paulo and Tokyo and Sydney, people stopped what they were doing. Some wept. Some raged. Some simply sat in silence, understanding what their species had done. The response came not from governments first, but from people. In the first hour, over 1 billion humans sent messages of support to the survivors waiting in the evacuation fleet. Artists began painting Sarah Chen's face. Musicians wrote songs about the courage, about young Marcus Webb, about Dr. Amara Okonkwo who had walked into the fire. In the second hour, the military academies saw volunteers standing in lines that stretched for blocks. Not because they were drafted. Not because they were coerced. Because they understood what it meant to stand for something. In the third hour, the United Earth Council convened in emergency session. Admiral Reeves stood before them with the details. The cost. The losses. The number of refugee civilizations now safe because of humanity's sacrifice. They called us weak, Reeves said quietly. They said we were too young, too small, too fragile for this galaxy. They left us on the front line to die. She pressed a button, and the view screen filled with images. Sarah Chen's damaged fleet. The refugee ship streaming away to safety. The faces of the fallen. But we didn't die, Reeves continued. We survived. And more importantly, we made a choice. We chose to protect people we'd never met. We chose to be the kind of civilization worth having in this galaxy. The vote was unanimous. In the shipyards, engineers and workers received new orders. Not to build a few more ships, but to transform. Thousands of vessels were authorized. Millions of recruits were brought in. The forges of human industry, dormant for decades in peacetime, roared back to life. But something else happened too, something the Council hadn't anticipated. The Velkar survivors sent a message. They wanted to help. They'd lost everything, but they had knowledge, expertise, the will to fight. Within weeks, thousands of Velkar volunteers were working alongside human engineers. Then the message came from the evacuated survivors in the safe zone. 12 different species, all refugees from the devourers. All wanting to fight. They began arriving at Earth. Not as subjects or subordinates, but as allies. The architects sent a delegation with advanced weapons designs. The Carillion Council, shamefaced at their retreat, sent engineering consultants. Even the Vadran Collective, that had abandoned their own people, sent technical advisors, not out of honor, but because they finally understood, humanity had shown them what courage looked like, and now they wanted to remember what it felt like. 3 months after the Vanguard transmitted its final message, something extraordinary was taking shape in Earth's shipyards. Sarah Chen stood in the command center of the new fleet, watching the ships being completed one by one. The Vanguard too, built from the ashes of her predecessor. The Webb, named after the young ensign. The Okonkwo, a medical and science vessel honoring those who healed even in darkness. But there were also the Velkar Hope, the Architect's Promise, the Carillion Pride. Vessels bearing the names of species that had learned what humanity already knew, that standing together was stronger than standing alone. Captain, her new first officer said, a Velkar named Reshtak who had survived the first evacuation. The final ship is complete. We're ready. Sarah looked at the display showing the assembled fleet. Over 300 ships now. Crews drawn from a dozen species. Supplies from worlds across human space. All of it built not for conquest, but for protection. For standing on the line together. Send a message across the network, Sarah said. To everyone serving in this fleet. To everyone waiting to fight. Tell them we're going back. Tell them we're not going back to win. We're going back so that no one has to flee alone ever again. The message propagated across the galaxy in microseconds, picked up by billions of screens, heard in billions of ears. On Velkar colony worlds, survivors wept. On distant architect stations, ancient beings remembered why they'd once been great. In quiet homes across Earth, people watched the live feed of the fleet engaging its engines. And in the darkness between stars, the Devourers, creatures that had never known fear, felt something new. A shadow moving toward them. Not running. Not hiding. Coming. The galaxy stands. The Devourers had consumed 43 civilizations. They had destroyed 1,000 worlds. They moved through the galaxy like a plague, like hunger given form, like the end of all things. They had never encountered resistance. Not like this. The unified fleet came out of hyperspace in formation, a constellation of ships bearing the symbols of 10 different species. Human and Velkar and Architect and a dozen others, all of them standing in the same line, facing the same darkness. Captain Sarachan watched the Devourer emergence patterns on her tactical display. They were immense. Terrible. Ancient beyond measure. And they were dying. The first barrage came not just from one ship but from 300. Missiles and beam weapons and energy discharges, all coordinated through a network that linked every crew, every species, every will into one purpose. The lead Devourer arrived under the assault, and for the first time in eons, it knew pain. All ships, maintain pressure. Sarah commanded. Velkar fleet, concentrate on the left flank. Architects, those energy cores are adaptive, hit them alternating frequencies. What had been slaughter when humanity stood alone became something else entirely when the galaxy unified. The architects shared tactical knowledge accumulated over millennia. The Velkar, fighting for their homeworld's memory, attacked with precision born of desperate hope. The Carillion pilots, warriors from a species that had fled, found their courage again when surrounded by allies who believed in them. And humanity, the youngest species, burned with the brightness of those who had nothing but their choice to stand here. Reshtak, the Velkar first officer, coordinated with Sarah perfectly. They'd trained together, bled together, and now they fought together. When one species needed support, the other provided it. When one line wavered, another surged forward to support it. This was not just military coordination. This was trust. Young Ensign Marcus Webb's sister, Lieutenant Jessica Webb, flew a new courage. She followed Sarah into the thick of battle, remembering her brother, flying like her life meant something. Because it did. It meant the refugee colonies lived. It meant the species her brother had died protecting got another chance. Dr. Amara Okonkwo's replacement was a doctor named James Park, and he worked in medical bays treating soldiers of every species, human and alien side by side, saving lives that came from worlds they'd never seen and would probably never visit. That was the work of healing now. That was the new purpose. For 6 hours, the battle raged. The Devourers were powerful, but they were finite. They could be damaged. They could be slowed. They could be stopped. Sarah watched as the largest devourer, the ancient one that had led the consumption of 100 civilizations, finally collapsed under coordinated strikes. Its massive form convulsed once, twice, and then went still. "That's one," she said quietly. 3 more remained. And 300 ships burned with the determination of species who had learned something the devourers never knew, that together, they were unstoppable. By the time the stars cleared from the dust of battle, only one devourer remained. It was wounded, its tendrils severed, its consuming power diminished to nothing. It tried to flee, to escape back into the void. The unified fleet did not let it. "All ships, cease fire," Sarah ordered as the final devourer crumbled into cosmic ash. The victory was clean. Complete. Final. There was silence across the communication network. Then, one by one, the victory calls began. Velkar pilots whooping with a sound like joy mixed with remembrance. Architect commanders acknowledging the success of coordinated tactics. Carillion warriors shouting the names of comrades who had fallen in the fleet's defense. And humanity sang. The news reached Earth in a wave that stopped the world. In cities and towns and quiet homes, people gathered around screens and saw the images, the unified fleet, the defeated devourers, the faces of a species that had learned to stand together. But Sarah's next message was what changed everything. "This is Captain Chen to the people of Earth and all the peoples of the galaxy. We came here as the youngest. The smallest. The ones everyone said couldn't matter. But we stood, and we learned something. The measure of a civilization isn't in how long it's existed or how many weapons it has. It's in the choice to stand beside others when the darkness comes. Today, we stood together. And today, we showed the galaxy what united we can be." She paused, looking out at her fleet, her mixed, strange, beautiful fleet of humans and aliens who had become something new together. "We're not done." The devourers were a symptom of a galaxy that had forgotten how to care for each other. "We're going to make sure no other species ever faces extinction alone. We're going to rebuild what was destroyed. And we're going to do it together." On Earth, governments fell and reformed. The old order of the galaxy changed. The architects, humbled and inspired, opened their archives to younger species. The Carillions built their military around the principle of collective defense. The Velkar, their people saved from annihilation, became the closest allies humanity would ever know. But the greatest change was deeper than politics or military structures. It was in the question that now echoed through civilization, in every language, across every world. What does it mean to be part of the galaxy? The answer was no longer, to be strong enough to survive alone. The answer was, to be brave enough to stand beside others. 5 years later, the unified galactic fleet numbered in the thousands. Humans and aliens served side by side. The shipyards built vessels named after heroes of all species. New colonies rose on worlds that had been devastated, rebuilt by communities of different peoples working toward the same future. Captain Sarah Chen, no longer alone on the bridge of a small human ship, walked through the command center of the flagship, a massive station that bore a name chosen by vote across all member species. The Together. Reshtak came to stand beside her, looking out at the stars. "Do you think," the Velkar officer asked, "that if we had known how this would end, we would still choose to stand that first day? When it seemed hopeless?" Sarah smiled. "I think," she said, "that we stood because it was the right thing to do. And everything that came after, the alliance, the victory, the unity, that came because of the choice we made when it looked like we'd lose." She placed her hand on the viewport, looking out at the vast expanse of space. "The devourers taught the galaxy something," Sarah continued. "They taught us that we could be consumed. But we taught the galaxy something else, that we can choose to be more than that. We can choose to be brave. We can choose to be kind. We can choose to stand together. Reshtak placed his own hand beside hers on the glass, a gesture that would have been unthinkable 5 years before. Then I am honored to have stood beside you, Captain. And to stand with you still. Sarah turned to face her friend, her comrade, her ally, and smiled. The honor is mutual. In the darkness of space, the unified fleet burned with steady light. Not the light of conquest or dominion, but the light of civilization choosing to care for itself. Choosing to stand together against the dark. Humanity had entered the galaxy as the youngest, the smallest, the ones everyone else had counted out. But they had learned something that changed everything, that the strongest force in the universe was not weapons or technology or ancient power. It was the choice to stand beside someone else. And once you made that choice, you were never alone. The stars burned eternal. The galaxy turned. And on 1,000 worlds, 1,000,000,000 voices rose together in a common voice, not conquering, not demanding, but protecting. They had faced the galaxy alone. Now, the entire galaxy stood united. And it was just the beginning.